Good afternoon, my name's Dave and welcome to another CAD lesson. I am joined today by Dom Main, by Dick Crabb and by Tom White. So let's just double check audio is working and go around the room. Dom, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, welcome to another left session and those joining us on LinkedIn for the first time, which is exciting stuff. I'm Dominic Main, I do production CAD amongst other things as well as lighting.
Thank you, Dom. And Dick? Dick's joining us again for the second time after a fabulous session a couple of weeks back.
Hello, I'm Dick Crabb. I'm a sound engineer, sound designer, and I'm the newbie here, the novice learning the art of CAD, and I've got some interesting new things to show you that I've been learning from these guys.
Fabulous. And this week, for the first time, we've got Tom White joining us as well. Hello, Tom. Tell us about yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom White. I do technical design drawings for live events and theatre, and I'm very happy to be here and hopefully teach some people a few things.
That is absolutely fabulous. So as I said, my name's Dave. I'm a production manager, so I've been using AutoCAD for I don't know, a decade and a half now, maybe. I use it really as part of my process to troubleshoot and solve problems. We found over the last few weeks that both Tom and Dom, who are kind of CAD specialists, who kind of focus all of their energy on drawing for other people, they have much more advanced skills than I have when it comes to the CAD. So today we're going to cover a brief recap on the last session. We dug into Xrefs last time, and there was quite a lot to be learned about Xrefs, so we really just scraped the surface. And then this week we're really here to talk about blocks in a bit more detail. We've introduced blocks before, and we've talked about them briefly, but we're going to dig into blocks in a bit more detail, like I said, and focusing on attributes and some of the data extraction that you can do with if you make use of blocks. So before that, let's just do a little recap. So Dom has kindly agreed to recap on Xrefs for us from last week. So Dom, tell us a little bit about. Dom, your audio's just gone funny. That's really dull. Just take a moment. We'll chat amongst ourselves. Do you want to maybe drop off and drop in again? I think Google's having a little bit of trouble. So Dick, why don't you start us off if you're there? Tell us a little bit about what you went on to do following this session last week or last time.
Okay. Yes, indeed. So we were shown, here we go, introduce a window. There we go. We were shown how to insert Xrefs and things like that. Hopefully you can see a basic CAD coming up. And we were also shown how to insert images. So what I was doing was using images.
Sorry, Dick, just let me jump in here. Sorry, just briefly. So, Dick, you use DraftSight, don't you, rather than AutoCAD? Tell us a little bit. Have you always used DraftSight? Have you tried any of the other software? Is DraftSight just happened to be the one that met that you had? How did you come to choose DraftSight before we launch into it?
I started with hooky copies of AutoCAD, then got a conscience. DraftSight used to be a free program. It's now a relatively cheap subscription. I think it's about £100 odd a year. So it's very affordable. And most of everything that it does, most of the commands are identical or as near as makes no odds to AutoCAD.
Brilliant.
So what I've done is here.
So you didn't quite use Xrefs as such, just because it didn't quite work in exactly the same way in DraftSight, did it? But you were able to basically look at the sound dispersion. Oh, there you go. Carry on.
Yeah, so Xrefs work exactly the same in DraftSight, but this is just taking a loudspeaker manufacturer's audio prediction software, which gives you this little heat map and then overlaying it onto a CAD. So this is overlaid as a straight image as part of a block, as we were taught, which allows me to turn them on and off. So this is 2 speakers on stands. This is now, stop getting the wrong layer. 4 loudspeakers on stands. If I go to that layer, then it won't give me those messages. Again, this is for loudspeakers on a truss, so just different overlays. And here's what would happen if we had a line array. So this was quite an interesting exercise just on its own. But then looking at it from a real project size. So this is a venue in Brussels. This is the real loudspeakers that I was going to use. This is the real heat map. And this is at about 4K, where the loudspeakers dispersion is nicely controlled. Yellow areas are the loudest, bright green, next one down. The olive greens get quieter, blues are nice and quiet. Here's the stage. You can see that there's a good coverage around all of the seating area and nice quiet stage. So that's at 4K, which is a kind of a good frequency for speech intelligibility. But if we then turn that layer off and look at it at 300 hertz, which is about vocal fundamental range, you can now see that the stage is absolutely swamped in sound. This is actually what really happens in a real event. And this is why you end up with speakers sounding thin, presenters sounding thin, not much level, not much gain before feedback. And this is a CAD plan telling me what my gut instinct is, and hopefully I can then use it to talk to designers like Tom, producers, what have you, and say, guys, we're going to struggle here. And here's a good representation of why we're going to struggle. And I think from the sound point of view, that's really interesting. It's a really useful thing to learn.
And Dick, I believe you're doing a Sound 101 session tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. Is that correct?
3 p.m. on the Facebook Live Events Society. Yes, Sound 101.
Marvelous. So I'm sure there'll be more detail in terms of how the sound side of things is affected, but it's been really good to see you kind of take away some of the skills that you've picked up from here and kind of been inspired to sort of solve some of the solutions that you need to solve using the CAD software.
Yes, indeed. But I think it's also a really interesting way of communicating problems up front in a visual fashion that everybody can understand.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it obvious straight away, doesn't it, where the challenges are likely to be. So it's fantastic. So then, Dom, why don't you dive into a little bit more? Sorry, we kind of jumped while we had problems with your sound. We dived away into Dick's session just to chat about what he'd been doing. So, Dom, why don't you take us through a little bit of?
Hopefully, you can hear me a bit better now. Is that better?
Yes,
I hope you can see my screen.
Indeed.
Cool. So a quick recap. I'm amazed, Dick. Absolutely brilliant stuff from a week on. People who have been with us previously will notice I've gone back to Windows this week to show a few bits later on when Tom is done. But I just want to recap on Xrefs and remind you how to do it. In AutoCAD for Windows and for Mac, the command is Xref on command line, type Xref. Or as we've talked about before, I have my Xrefs launched in the corner of my screen, and you can attach a DWG images. Hopefully you can all see this. Pop-ups are working. Excellent. Reasons for doing Xrefs, as Dick's talked about, this base plan in real world has come in from Tom has done, manager, but it was a show last year for Jaguar. In here, the plan has arrived with truss, which rigging is put in. We have all the tables, and so if I was the lighting designer or the sound designer, I can now start adding my equipment to this. And as we spoke about before, it will keep the drawing nice and light, and you can interact with the main designer, say Tom, and just send a lighting layer back again. So if we then wanted to grab lights, we can then put them on top of the reference drawing, which, as we talked about last week, was in the correct place, and just bring them to the trusses and drop the lights in the correct places as we go along. And then you can build your design up. And then if I, very quickly, as we talked about before, detach the reference, or unload it, we'll unload it, not detach it, unload it, so make the reference go away. It's going to take a little bit of thinking as I've been drawing. You can see all we're left with on this plan, which we'd send back, would be those lights. And then that would reference back to Tom's main drawing, nice and neatly. And then any updates that were going on, Tom could either send me a new drawing and I could update it with my reference, or he could take them into his drawing. So hopefully that describes it a little bit better.
Wonderful.
And that was the unload one we talked about before. I hadn't showed it before. But if you want to put it back in again, if you have to put it on the lay itself, then just hit reload, and it'll just bring the reference back in again.
Fabulous. Tom, I know obviously you weren't involved in the session a couple of weeks back, but do you make heavy use of Xrefs as well? Well, in fact, I know you do.
They're unbelievably useful when you have multiple teams working in different locations. Sorry, and the reason I say that is if I'm not able to talk to the audio designer and the audio designer says I've changed this and that, it's just very, very easy to unload the audio layer or audio Xref and reload their new one in, and I don't necessarily need to have a large description about where that new speaker's moved to, but I find it incredibly useful. Yes.
Fabulous. Brilliant. And yeah, I would just say as well, like I am forever receiving. I think where Dom and Tom would do a lot of kind of drawings from scratch themselves, I think I would actually do an awful lot more compiling of different people's drawings. So I'd often get a drawing from a designer, get a drawing from the agency studio, get a drawing from the scenic or the carpenters, sound design, lighting design, truss plans, and kind of I don't do a lot more kind of compiling of the different drawings into a single thing. So I think I think heavy use of Xrefs is definitely worth going back and just watching that session again if you haven't seen it.
So just a little question insert here again from the user side. Tom, Dom, would you prefer a single sound layer that is always the most current and then I back save historical, or would you like them to be obviously as you change the master plan references? Do you want me to rename them? Which would you prefer?
I think from my point of view, from Dom's point of view, I prefer you to only rename your drawing when you do an update. So if I'm looking down a whole folder of lighting, scenic, and if I'm compiling plans, say at the end of the week across several halls, I'll look in and see where they've changed from the previous week. And if your reference number hasn't changed, I'm not going to have to worry about updating your information that week. Whereas if it has changed, I know you've made a change within the project and I've got to pay attention to it. So
how about you, Tom?
And there's I would agree fully with Tom. Out of interest, in 2021, which is the latest AutoCAD for PC, there's a feature where it will highlight the change in an Xref, which you could have done before, but this is a totally automated process. So if there was a new DWG that's been saved and it's a new Xref, it will pop up and it said, would you like me to highlight the difference between the two, the old and the new? Which is an interesting feature, which I haven't gone into much detail because it's only launched 3 or 4 weeks ago. But otherwise, yes, I'd fully agree with what Dom said.
Because you used to have to sort of manually use the compare function, didn't you, before? So that would be quite interesting to explore.
You're entirely right. It's my understanding it is the compare function, but in a more automated process, which is wonderful, because I did use the compare function slightly, but it wasn't always the easiest thing to use.
No.
But now with an Xref, because an Xref always have the same origin, or ideally always has the same origin, it's a really, really handy tool, and I've played around with it a few times, but yeah, it's good.
So just again, because as somebody who receives plans that get updated, so this compare function, this shows you the difference between two. So I would Xref in your design layer, Dom's lighting layer. This compare tool would show me the difference between the two, an old and a new.
Absolutely, it would compare the two drawings as long as they got the same origin points. It will compare the two drawings, and totally from memory, I can't remember, Dom, if you agree, but I believe the nothing's changed as a grey, change from one drawing as a green, change from another drawing as a red, and then in addition, it will produce a revision cloud around the area, which is terribly, terribly handy.
I've just downloaded 2021 this week. I haven't actually used that, but in DWG compare terms, it is a very useful thing. It boxes and shows you where stuff has changed, and it answers a question. Actually, someone who hopefully is watching again this week, Sharon Hobden, who is a DSM in the world of theatre, and we talked about this about her being able to see what's changed on a set plan very quickly if she needs to remark a plan or not. So actually, DWG Compare stretches out from us just trying to work out what's changed, maybe in lighting or sound terms, to people further down the production chain, really trying to find out decent information if they have to update or if they can just leave it on that occasion.
Massive massive time saver, isn't it?
Yeah.
I remember specifically on an MWC project earlier in the year, I used it because I wasn't necessarily face to face with the construction company, but it was a huge thing to describe, literally at a click of a button, what the changes are, and it was incredibly handy.
Marvelous.
Yeah, it's in the world of lighting. Just to finish off, while lighting gets sent a new lighting plan, and all that's happened is in the key the numbers have changed, but you don't know within this whole hall where the fixtures have changed, and you've got to go and find them. And be able to just click a button and go, "This is what's changed," saves hours.
Absolutely
hours and
huge.
hours.
So as well as Xrefs, I think that compare function is a massive time saver for many different people in quite a few different ways. So let's get to today's subject, which is blocks indeed. Now, we've touched on blocks before. We've had a kind of initial session talking about just how to create them and how to edit them, but we're going to recap some of that for those of you that didn't see it, and then we're going to go into a bit more detail in terms of block attributes and data extraction and how you can kind of make use of some of the more advanced functions there to solve kind of real world production problems. So Don, would you mind unsharing your screen for now? And then Tom, if you wouldn't mind jumping into the driving seat there. First off, Tom, do you what is a block? Why do you bother using a block in the first place?
I personally try and use a block because it will give me information which I feel will be useful to other people. And so when I'm producing a drawing, I desire to make it as useful as possible. So I'm hopefully people can see in front of me there are 3 chairs, which I believe that quite a lot of people could tell it's a chair, but nonetheless I feel that it would be appropriate for me to give more information, just the visual. So therefore a block could be counted multiple times. It could be deleted quickly. It can be copy and pasted easily. That's why I use a block.
Yeah, so I guess on the kind of more conceptual level, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Don, but Vectorworks would call this a symbol, but on a bit of paper, essentially a block is a symbol. So it's just something that indicates that is there to indicate something else. And I think, Tom, what you're saying is that you can actually put an awful lot more information into that block, which you can then make use of later, rather than it just visually appearing to look the same. But go on, tell me about those 3. What's the differences between those 3 blocks then, or those 3 elements?
You're entirely right, Dave. And in theory, you don't need to use a block. But this one on the left-hand side is is a very sensible way of starting a drawing. So,
cool. So that's not a block. That one's just a set of polylines or whatever, right?
Exactly. So in this circumstance, it's 2 polylines. So there's the back of a chair, there's a seat of the chair, and in this circumstance, I desire to have a number 1 in the middle, and the number 1 is either representing one person going to sit there, or it's the first chair in a row of 10.
Cool.
So you can start like this, and it's an incredibly good way of doing a good starting point. But these 3 blocks, these 3 images here are progressing from the left to the right, just slightly more information. So yeah, absolutely, starting in this point is fantastic. But in my opinion, there's no time difference between doing this and the next step. So the next step is the middle one, which is a block. The block is identical, it's the same colors, it's got the same number 1 in the middle, but when you click on it, rather than in this circumstance, I see 3 separate items here. If I press escape, if I click on this middle one, the same 3 elements are highlighted, but there's only 1 node which is highlighted that you can change the location of this block. So this block in this circumstance is identical, same size, but it's just slightly more information. So before I go any further, so this is the model space I'm drawing in. I always, in my opinion, have the properties on the right-hand side. So I'll probably mention that a few times. There's property on the right-hand side, and there's a command line at the bottom. So in this circumstance, I'm selecting this, and the production manager calls me up and says, Tom, how many seats are in this venue? And because it's drawn in this manner, I say, I'm so sorry, production manager, it's a great question, but I don't know the answer. So that's why I move on to this. So then in this circumstance, I'm going to go to, I've selected as one item.
So that's grouped those items basically into one single block, you mean? So if you try and do any sort of count functions, you can then, it's not counting all the individual elements. Is that what the point of?
Yeah, you're entirely right. So this left hand one here shows that there are 3 elements held in my hand, but that we know that those 3 elements should be deemed as one element, which is why I moved on to this circumstance. So there's 1 element in my hand. It's the properties, it's calling itself a block, and I go right down to the bottom to the miscellaneous tab here. Hopefully everyone can see quite clearly. I've called this a chair block. It could be called anything, and you don't necessarily need to give it a name. But the reason that it's useful to give it a name is for something that Don might mention later, is data extraction. So rather than calling it 1, 2, 3, I've personally called it a chair block, because it helps me, but then more importantly, it might or might not help other people later in the process. And in this circumstance, it's great because I can copy it, and rather than, if I copy this 3 times, I presume it's going to say that I've got 9 elements in my hand, but we know it's 3 chairs. So the production manager calls me now, and I can say, yeah, there we go. I've got a block of a chair, and there's 3 chairs. So please can you organize 3 chairs to be delivered to the venue? Another thing that I've done here is that if I just copy this, an arbitrary measurement, so 1.5 meters away, and I'm going to use a command called set by layer. So when I receive drawings, they can be quite deceiving. So these look identical, and they all look wonderful, and they all look like a chair. But if I use the set by layer command, the one on the left hand side is going to change. So what that was is this one here had a layer override, and in the circumstance of this layer override, it was the color. So
someone had basically had forced a color on that line, on that actual element, basically, whereas you want it to be organized, the color to be driven by the layer that the object sits on. Is that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There could be a number of reasons. We mentioned the DWG compare. That's one thing where it's overwriting the color when you're trying to print it. So in this circumstance here, if I wanted to highlight this is a separate color when printing it, it might be quite challenging because the actual element is forced to be on the magenta layer. Yeah. If I wanted to do a quick print and for some reason print it in green, it would be more challenging than necessary. So that's the reason why I try my best, if possible, when receiving a drawing, use set by layer, which is a hugely useful, but I suppose it can be relatively dangerous because somebody has spent a long time producing quite a nice drawing. And in this circumstance, they have what they have helpfully done. They have put these 4 elements on 4 different layers, which is fantastic, until I come along and I do set by layer, and then I can't really do anything with it at all. So there's another reason. Try my very best to not use that. So trying my best not to override the color or the line weight. So moving on to this one here. So these 3 elements have used the set by layer, and
so when you've run that command, basically, it has forced whatever layer the element was on to go on to what layer? The current layer, or something that you've specified, or what?
The actual layer name stays the same.
Yeah.
It's in the top ribbon up here. You can see. There's a color symbol, there's a thickness symbol.
So it's actually the properties that are being set by the layer properties, is that correct?
That's entirely correct.
Gotcha,
which is
cool.
why I say it's a little bit dangerous when I receive a drawing and I use the set by layer on these 4 chairs here, because now I don't know what that is in comparison to that. At least
gotcha.
This was lighting, maybe this was audio, and maybe this was exterior.
Gotcha.
So
one of the guys could turn up on site and they could have their wrong chair at their desk and they would be fuming.
Potentially, yeah. If we move on to this, I use the set by layer for these 2, and you can see that visually they're identical. So this is, I believe you've discussed in some detail blocks in the past. So this middle one in my hand here, I know it's a block. Well, we can see it's a chair, but it could be anything. So I know it's a block. I know it's called a chair block, and there's only one of them in my hand
And so,
because
sorry,
it doesn't actually have a number.
just to recap on that, how do you get it from the left-hand one to the center one? How do you create that block?
Okay, so I would do set by layer.
Yeah.
So therefore, I've got this one here. You can choose the layer you desire it to go onto, and you use the block command. So whenever you're trying to do something in AutoCAD, and I've got an incredibly bad short-term memory, so I just type anything in. If I've forgotten to do something, so in this circumstance, my end result is a block. So why don't I try and type block into the command line and press enter? You can see maybe.
Tom, sorry, can I just pause you for a
AutoCAD
second? I think your audio's gone a bit crunchy again. Sorry, would you mind just try rejoining? Sorry to stop you mid-flow. It's a bit weird. We can chat amongst ourselves for a moment. Hello, Tom. I presume you use blocks. Oh, you're on mute. Use blocks all day, of every single day, presumably.
Dave, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah. No, Tom's back. Gotcha. Tom was just on mute. Oh, we've lost Dom now as well. I don't know what's going on this afternoon. Go for it, Tom. Start sharing your screen again, and then yeah, let's jump back into where you were. Perfect.
Fantastic. Yes, Dave, can you see it?
Yes.
See my screen? Fantastic. Three elements.
Oh, I've just lost you again, Tom. Try again for me, Tom. Just speak again.
So I divide 3 elements into a block.
Sounds like your headset might be a bit muffled or something there. I don't know if it's a loose connection maybe, or if the microphone's just got caught in your clothes or something. I'm not sure. In your shirt. No, I lost you. Oh no! Sounds like a dodgy connection.
Speak to a soundboard.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I got you again.
Just turning off and on again, it worked.
Oh, fancy that.
So quickly before the audio goes, I want to turn this into a block. In the command line, which is this text at the bottom, I type in block. For AutoCAD for the last 3 or 4 years has tried to help you in this circumstance. So you don't necessarily need to write the whole word in, but it tries to describe what you might want to do. Some of these things I've never used, but in this circumstance, I'm going to use block. A dialog box will come up, and I'm going to say, you name it whatever you desire. You name it whatever you desire. You pick the location where you want your grab handle to be. In this circumstance, I desire it for the front of the chair. I'm going to select the elements here and then press enter, which is the space bar or enter. And so there's lots of other things you can do on this. I just use the pick point, which is this element, and the select objects, which is this one. I click OK. And now you can see it change from white to magenta, and the reason for that is because I chose the furniture layer, and the furniture layer is magenta, but of course you can change it to anything you desire.
Fabulous.
So that's how I change those 3 elements, which is 2 polylines and 1 text block, into 1 element, which is more useful. So in this circumstance, it's called nice block. But do you mind if I move on slightly?
Yeah, carry on, absolutely.
Okay, so we've done that, and I'm going to explode. So explode is you desire to get a block into its original form. So in this circumstance, I'm going to explode that once. So again, explode. Is that going to work? There we go. It turns it into its original element.
And you can just hit
element
X as well for that command.
Yes, and in this element here, I'm going to explode this as well. So I've exploded it, and you can see that visually they're identical because they are essentially identical. This here is 3 elements in my hand. This here is 3 elements in my hand. But I'm going to use the explode command again on this one here, and it's going to look quite different. So this, I think, is a feature where we were talking earlier, and it might be quite useful for some people. You don't necessarily need to do it, but if you have time, it might be something that's handy. And what it is, it's an attribute within a block. So an attribute can be many things. It can be a move command.
Sorry, in the left-hand block, the number there is just a number in text form. In the center block, again, the number there is just a number in text form, but included within the block. And then in the right-hand side, what you're saying is that that number was displayed to us as a number 1, but actually within the block, what it was an attribute, and it was just that text that's the attribute. Is that right?
100%. And
Cool.
a circumstance where I might desire to use it is if I've got 3 chairs in a row, but I desire to have a number 1 here, number 2 here, and number 3 here. In that circumstance, I'd have to explode this block, which is a negative thing, because I wouldn't then be able to come back and say, yes, I have 3 chairs for sure. I would have to count it by hand. But in this circumstance, if I did the same thing, I can. So this one and this one are identical, but on the right hand side, this second one here is still called a block. It's still got a miscellaneous section here, which in this circumstance I called it a chair, which is 500 millimeters squared. But there's also something called attribute, and this element here is what we're moving on to now. An attribute in this circumstance is a text attribute, and
is it worth just popping onto, for example, the other main use of attributes, I suppose, is in your template. So in your actual title block for your paper space, and you very kindly created a title block for my company and my stuff that I do as well. And yeah, it was a fantastic title block for quite a few different reasons. But as well as the text attributes, you've actually got a few quite clever little time-saving, life-simplifying tricks in there as well. So do you want to just briefly run through how you use attributes in this context, which gives a slightly wider sense of what you can do?
Yeah, so Dave's entirely correct that an attribute more often than not is going to be for text. And in this circumstance, it's very, very likely that people would have seen a title block where you enter text into it by double-clicking on the block. In this circumstance here, you can put text against project or the client or the venue. And that's what we'll describe in the chair block in a moment. But essentially, you double click on here and you can put any text you desire into it, and that's how it updates. But another attribute in this circumstance is down here in the layout tab, it says A3 brackets 1. The brackets 1 doesn't mean anything, but in this circumstance, I know I've set this title block up for A3 piece of paper, but I desire to change it to an A2 piece of paper. And in this circumstance, with the same block, I can change the title block to a different size. I have to do a little bit more work to actually get it to print to A2, but this is a fantastic way of really, really quickly printing a drawing in a different size for somebody running into a meeting. So that's another attribute that can be changed. And in this circumstance, the third scenario is a pull down. So whenever you're doing a drawing, you would associate a scale to it. So 1 to 10, for argument's sake. We know it's A3 piece of paper, so therefore you could, in theory, convert it back from a PDF that I might share with someone to a DWG if you know it's a 1 to 10 on A3. But what's going to help you even more is this as a scale bar, which has the attribute in this circumstance is visual states. So you're visually showing different scales, but essentially you are it's as simple as a different piece of paper. So basically there's a scale of 1 to 2, or there's a scale of 1 to 50, and basically all it is it's just showing a different block. So it's called a visibility state, I believe.
And so, sort of all together, those are called dynamic blocks. Is that right? So you're creating these different ways of using the same block, but dynamically to provide different information. Again, in a sort of, the whole point, I guess, is to speed up the workflow, right? So that you can produce these things as quickly as possible.
Most definitely, that in the same manner as why you go from not using a block to using a block is to speed it up, and why you go from a block to a dynamic block again is to speed it up.
Perfect, marvelous. So do you want to jump back to your other?
So this circumstance here is I've got 3 chairs that I desire to put 1, 2, 3 in. The only way I would, in my opinion, you would be able to do it in this circumstance, you'd have to explode. But that's of no use to me because I can't then count. So I desire to do 1, 2, and 3, and with an attribute, I'm able to do a 1, 2, and 3. So down here, I've selected those 3 blocks and go all the way to the bottom, and there's a table called attributes, and the word name is what me or yourself would enter, and this is where you could do different seat numbers. So in this circumstance, I can do 1, 2, and 3. And if you select more than one at a time, you can change them all at the same time.
And if you double
So
click them as well,
sorry, that's an incredibly valid point, isn't it? So if I go back to the title block, Dave, here I can select it, and again the attributes are shown down here. But more often than not, for no specific reason, generally when I'm entering data into a title block, I'll double click on it, and the same information will come up. So as Dave quite rightly pointed out, I've got this here, and I can either see it as a number 1 here, or if I double click on the text or on the block itself, I can change 1 to 33. So, and in that circumstance, I suppose if you're going to a very high number and you're going to 1, 2, 3, it's going to be too wide. So exactly the same as you can with a title block, you can change the properties of the text. You can do the text options, and in this circumstance, I desire to change the width factor to 0.6, and just for the 1, 2, 3 to fit in. So, as briefly as I possibly can I describe how to produce this block?
yeah.
So, in this circumstance, I've got a chair, and in this circumstance, there's 2 polylines. So, a polyline is just a representation of a line that is closed. And the reason it's closed is you can hold it, and it says, is it closed? Yes, in comparison to just a line on its own, and you can pull it around on its own. So in this circumstance, I've drawn a chair like that. I do ATTDEF, which is attribute definition, and press enter. Okay, so where you see, so on the top left here, the word name is me entering a reference which nobody's ever going to see except for a draft person. So in this circumstance, I'm going to put a number instead. I'm not going to put anything in prompt, and I'm going to do middle center for the text. But the rest of the stuff you're very, very welcome to change here, but I feel it's more time efficient to change it later on, because I could change any of these now, and I'm more than likely going to get the size of the text wrong or the position of the text wrong. So I'm going to click OK. In my hand is incredibly small text, but I'm going to zoom in and the word number. So I'm going to click in the center of this seat and press OK. And I now have the white line, which it should be a polyline, but it's not. I have to make it into a polyline. But in the middle is the word number. Sorry, the word number. But on the right hand side here, I'm going to do a few different things. I'm going to make it a bit bigger because I can't read that. So I've changed the size of it to make it more readable. And in exactly the same way as we did earlier, you now change that into a block. So if I do B for block or type in the word block and press enter, I'm going to put this as 1, 2, 3. I'm going to pick the point. I'm going to select these 3 objects and press enter. A dialog box is going to pop up, and it's going to want me to put something in this dialog box, which you don't have to. But in this circumstance, I've chosen to put 1, 2, 3. So that's how you go from a block to, you go from a standard way of drawing a chair to a block to doing a block with a definition.
And just briefly, if you jump back into the ATTDEF command, the attribute definition command, and that sort of center line with prompt, the way that I would sometimes use that is I would just say, I'd put a question in there like, what is the number, or how many chairs, or what is the weight, or what is the reference, just to remind me. If the tag is quite short, basically, the prompt is just a little bit expanded bit of that. Dom or Dick, do you tend to use that, or do you not bother with that?
It depends if it's going to be used by other people a lot of the time. But yeah, sometimes I put it into what it's actually asking to do. So it depends how simple or confusing the block is.
You just kind of expand on it a little bit in terms of
and Dave, that's a really sensible way of doing it, because I believe, and I don't know if Dom, if you agree, with the tag you can't put a space. So I couldn't write that, for example. I think you'd have to do that. Which, in comparison to prompt, you can do. I presume there's a limit to the text, but nonetheless, you can do normal text with normal spaces in between.
Yeah, and then similarly, if for default, for example, if you wanted every single block to always have default text in it, so if you wanted it to have like C for chair or something, or if you wanted it to have 500 by 500, the size of it or something, until you then change it to something more specific. That's again what you would put in as the default. But yeah, those are the only bits really that I use. I think similar to what you were saying.
Yep. So yeah, that's how we go about it. And I suppose Dick, you were talking earlier about putting a weight associated to something. So that's how I personally would put text, which could be determined as a weight associated to a block.
And I guess you don't necessarily need everything to be visible within the paper space layout. So you could have really, really, really mini text, because actually only the person that was looking or at the file within AutoCAD could then reference the information that's over under properties, for example, as
That's
a
a
way to
very
keep your
valid
drawing
point.
quite tidy,
Yeah.
but sort of retaining some of that detailed information.
Yeah, that's a really valid point, Dave. Because if you were doing a 1,000 seats and each had a number in it, it might just be a bit overpowering. So you might desire to hide it in its entirety. So yeah, you're entirely right.
Go on, Dick. Sorry, did you have a question there?
No, I was just going to say, no, this is my homework. So most of the loudspeakers that I would put on have already been created by the manufacturers on their websites. The CAD blocks already exist, and they don't, as far as I can tell, have any attributes on them at the moment. But they're also far too detailed. They're almost engineering plans. So as part of my enforced absence workload, I'm going through and reducing them, simplifying themselves, putting frames on them, and adding the weights attributes. That seems to me an enormously useful thing to do.
Yeah.
Dick, just can I just describe one other thing which might or might not be helpful in your circumstance? There often, if I'm doing power symbols, for example, you might put a phase and then an amp, and you might desire for them to be on two separate lines. So, I don't know, Dom, if you have a specific way of doing it, but in this circumstance, I'm going to explode this, and the number, I'll make it a bit smaller. I'll put it outside the actual chair in this circumstance. But because I know that I've done all the work to get that right, the right center line, I've got the right text height, etc., I can actually just copy that, and you can change the tag. So in this circumstance, I'm just going to do the tag. Sorry, actually, you know what I'll do is I'll do number 1. I don't know if you do it a different way, Dom, but that's just a quick way that you can have 2 lines.
It's absolutely the most obvious way, because as you said, you've done all the work. So you're doing is just copying the information across, re-tagging it, and yeah, off you go, and then just resave as a block. And then, as you talked about earlier, from Dick's point of view, he can have quite large text information in the block, and then possibly buried quite smallly in it, and you could be other information about dimensions, which would then data extract out of the plan. It's all there, it's all been held, but it's not overpowering the plan. So
yeah, and then that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because in theory, I'm going back to, let's presume that a chair is incredibly useful. So in this circumstance, you could put 0. Whoops, apologize. You could do 0 here at a much bigger height, and then these ones here at a much, as Dave was mentioning, is a much smaller, because you don't desire it to be shown. So yeah, you could do that.
I have to say, our friends from Germany do this a lot. Particularly in lighting, and they'll bury all the photometrics of the light within the light itself, and it's very, very small, but if you interrogate the block, you can know exactly what the output of the light is, what the physical size is. But if you generally look at the plan, you don't see any of it, you just see the unit number. But if you want to know what that light is, it's all buried within the block.
So yeah, so I guess so Dick, in your sort of scenario with a speaker, like what sort of information is useful and who's it useful to? I guess, from my perspective, I kind of, as a production manager, I want to know where you want to put the box, so that I can make sure that there's, the rigging's in place or whatever for it. But you might want to know more information about what the box is, what the dispersion's like, I guess information about, I don't know, is it useful to have information about the spec of the box, or if you've done the design but then another team is then taking it on to sort of rig it, like if you want it to be rigged over the top of truss, or if you want it to be done in a certain way, I guess you could include some of those standard, is it being mounted horizontally or vertically, for example? Is it on a flying frame, or is it on a stick, or is it built into some set, or whatever it happens to be?
Absolutely, and this is the learning that I'm going on to try and figure out. I mean, the obvious, as we've talked about, is the weights. That way, I don't have to produce a new sound layer with weights, because the existing one tells us everything we need to know.
Yep.
If I get those attributes right, and yeah, for sure, it's a way of reducing the amount of duplication of information that I have to do. So if I'll do a schematic of how I want the amps patching to the loudspeakers and what have you, it can all be on the one plan. It can all tell you, it can all spit out from the same plan exactly what goes where, what amp patch it is,
Yeah.
what sockepex it is, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because as we all know, duplication causes errors. And if I only have to do it once, then great.
Perfect. All right, fantastic.
And,
sorry, Tom. Yeah.
Well, I was really briefly. I did this a bit of a rush, but Dick, if you're doing it yourself, I'd recommend. So I'm going to explode this. I'd recommend putting those two elements onto a new layer, so you can turn that layer off at a later date.
So in your viewport, for example, you could choose just to show the sort of key bit of information, and just to hide any of the other information that really you don't want printed.
Yeah, so in this, I can done it on the text layer, so you can just turn it on and off really quickly.
So you can create a symbol or a block with multiple layers attached to it. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's where it
correct,
gets quite powerful, really, because it allows you to control quite easily what you're displaying in your when you send a PDF to print. Or
so when
I'm
so when I'm going back to the loudspeakers manufacturer's default loudspeaker symbol, I open that up, I explode it so that I can kind of get rid of the bits that are not necessary. Then put all those bits, write a new block, put that on one layer that's a speaker there, and then put all of the other stuff, the weights, on a different layer. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
like
the
other way I use it sometimes is to have a 2D and a 3D version of the thing, whatever the thing is. So I might have a sort of the master layer that the block sits on, but then within the block I would have a 2D and a 3D version, again, so that I can turn them on and off, whether I'm looking at a side elevation, or if I'm looking at an ISO, or if I'm just looking in plan view, to make sure none of that 3D information is clogging up the sort of making a drawing a bit too heavyweight. But if I have it there in the first place, it means when I bring that block into any drawing that I'm working in, again, it's just a much more automated process. Any other things that you, Dom or Tom, that you guys intend to include in blocks? I guess you could include location or like room names if you were doing a show with loads and loads of different exhibition stands or loads of different conference spaces.
I suppose I know I'm talking about chairs an awful lot, but a circumstance I might use something else within a block, Dom, would be a hatch. So in this circumstance, I could be entirely wrong, but I sometimes use it. So I might put a white hatch with the text over it, so therefore I know for certain that people can actually read the text, because underneath the seat there might be a dip trap, or there could be another symbol that I don't desire to be seen so clearly. So sometimes within a block I might put a hatch within it, so I know for certain that the text is very, very visible when it's printed out.
Absolutely, I do that for network drop points when putting hundreds of network drop points on the plan. I don't want to spend my whole time trying to sort out where everything's sitting, so they're all hatched up and they'll just sit on top. And they'll be seen and easily read. So
perfect.
Yeah, you can make a block as intricate as you want, really. It is, as Dick is about to start out on this journey, if anyone else is doing it, it really is worth investing time in your blocks, because when you come to draw a plan and Dick will receive a layout from a production manager, it is just dragging them into the plans and they're there. It's all got all the information ready to go. So drop your blocks onto the plan, data extract, how many speakers you put on, you're ready to go. And you can make up, in Dick's point of view, you can make up amplifiers, you can make up sound desks, and it is just a very quick way of pulling stuff onto a plan and getting the information out straight away. So
Fabulous. I'm just
been-
aware we are running out of time. We've gone over time already. But Dom, you had a couple of bits just to do with data extraction. Do you want to share your screen, Tom, if you wouldn't mind unsharing for a moment?
Have I done that?
You
I'll
have
just grab it.
except
Hopefully it's gone through.
got your audio, but video's not catching up currently. It's a bit annoying.
Has it got there? Says I'm presuming. I'll try and do it again. I'll stop presuming. I'll just try and do it again.
Okay, yeah, just waiting for a moment. We've just actually just lost you on the Hangout, so I'll just wait for you guys to come back again. Try again. No, it seems to... Google Meet seems to have crashed on me. Right, bear with me a moment, guys. Sorry about this. I've got audio, but no picture at the moment at all.
It's all going horribly wonderful, isn't it?
Wow. Actually,
Any
never
better?
seen Google do this before, but no, I've lost it. Yeah, I've lost the Hangout completely. I'm just going to go out and come back in again. Except I don't
Yeah,
even see
I've
you
had to
guys again.
restart. Yeah.
Yeah, bear with me a moment. I'll just drop out of the thing and come back in again. Bear with me a moment. Right, Dave's back on the meeting, and I'm starting to got everyone again, so that's good. Just bear with me to make sure that, yeah, there we go, cool. Sorry, Dom, go for it. Share your screen.
Shall I try presenting?
Yes. See if that breaks it again.
Let's give it a go. Yes, here we
Yep. Seeing you now.
Yay!
Great.
Seeing you now. Brilliant. So carrying on left off wonderfully. First of all these blocks I cannot take credit for. They're all from PRG, and they're all fantastic blocks. And I'm afraid this is all in my other world, which is lighting. And these blocks carry a fair bit of information, and you can see some of it in already. I hope you can see this blown up. So this is a 2K Fresnel, and it's called a generic Fresnel, 8-inch lens on the front. I've given it a focus, so it has a focus attribute, so it's at stage wash. It has a color attribute at 202.
Dom, sorry, can I just stop you for 1 second? Would you mind just going back to the point where you insert that block? I'm just not sure we've covered that in this session, just to make it really obvious. Like, where does that block come from in the first place?
It's actually come from another drawing, and I haven't actually got it here.
Okay, gotcha.
Quickly while we were talking earlier, but you would go insert block, and it would pop up a screen and collect them.
Perfect. And so then when you insert that block, it pops up that attributes display, doesn't it? So then it asks you to put
it does,
in
yeah. So as soon as you touch it, here's a blank unit.
Yeah.
So as soon as you touch it, and I've got my quick properties we've talked about before. Tom has his properties on the right, and it has ready to go. As Tom did a number of persons in the seat, we're using the information or the attributes slightly differently. We want to know, as Dick would, information about this single light or about a single speaker. So we can add in information about focus. So we can say this unit wants to be focused at the lectern, and you can tab your way through. I'd like some Lee 202 filter in this light. We're not going to have a gobo this time because it's doing a lectern. Unit number, we could give it a U number, but we're not. We're going to give it a channel number, so we're going to call it channel 12 from the lighting desk, and it could have a DMX number if it was a dimmer of 12 as well. And as soon as you click through those, all that information is put in. And as Tom talked about earlier, this information arrives in different colors, but it also, if we pop over here, when PRG made them, it arrives in different layers. So we have an attribute for a channel, for a color, for a DMX, for focus. And so when you got to your layouts and publishing, you could turn this information on and off very easily.
So they've actually put every single different bit of information on a different layer there.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, that's quite a sensible approach, really, isn't it? Because it just means that, you know, if you were producing a load of different viewports on different paper space layouts, you could control completely which layers you were displaying on which elements of the printout.
Yeah, absolutely. If we put my CAD head back on, and Tom, I'm sure, would hopefully talk similarly, if we were just doing a general arrangement, we nobody wants to see what the focus information is, where it's plugged into. You just want to see the lights on the truss.
Yeah.
That information, all this information here is only useful to the production electrician and lighting designer.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
where the
yeah.
light is on the truss is useful to Dick and producers and production managers. So it allows you to filter information. What I should just also say is if we want to, you can apply information across several units. If we select all these units, we can put the same information across them all. Oops, I'll put color focus. We go DT for top table. We can give these a color correction as well. And then you'd have to come down and do separate numbers for dimmer information, but you can quickly fill information out. What you can do, I was going to see if this other screen will pop up when I do this. Will you see it? No, you won't. Yeah, it does come up.
Yeah, gotcha.
You can do something called data extraction, which is very powerful. And this is extracting all the information within a block, all the attributes.
So those columns are then giving you the attribute name. So the tag basically is what.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got going along the top, we've got a handle, which is the unique ID to AutoCAD when it was put in the drawing. And this is very useful, very important, because it allows this information to be put back into the drawing again. So if I come back into the actual drawing, I could, the two commands you want are @out and @in. So there they are, @out and @in. So attribute out and attribute in. So if we type @out, it's kind of slightly back to front. We want to send information out of this drawing. It'll ask you for somewhere to save it, and so I was going to save it into left blocks, and we'll call it left blocks, and let's call it 4.1 because we want to update it. And it's going to ask you what part of the drawing do you want to extract it, and you can either hit enter to do everything, or you can drag across and select the blocks. So I was going to drag across, select the blocks, hit enter, right click, and that has now been sent to a file. I come back in here. And
is that a CSV file or is that an Excel
file? It's a CSV file. You'll
Yeah,
see it in a second. As soon as I open it up.
Pretty interchangeable in terms of the format.
Yeah. So select all files. That's the new one I've done, which is very frustrating because I've gone through the machines. But if I open a file, as I'll replace this, go back, just close this and so we can do it properly. Don't save. Best laid plans and all of that. 4.1's arrived now, so that's kind of useful. So you'll actually see. This is the only reason I use Excel. So one of the few reasons I use Excel. So Dropbox, Left Learning, and then we want all files. Don't be confused. Don't see it's not an Excel file. So file, and it's still not there. If we bring it in, it would just ask you to do. Here we go. It's saying it's a text import. You click through. Agree to everything along the way, click finish at the end, and it brings that information in. What you can do is also in here, you can fill this information in here. So if you've got a lot of units to do and you've labeled your speakers with information, or in lighting terms, you've given it a place so you know what the lights are, you can then fill in the other information very, very quickly. So we could give these lights a whole 201, drop it down, and then once you save this back again, the numbers but rubbish, you can then import that back into the drawing with that in. So
that's a specific import function.
Yeah, I think what I have to say here is this is not available on AutoCAD for Mac. I don't know if it's available on your CAD software, Dick, but it's under Express Tools. For Windows use, it's under Express Tools.
I suspect not.
Out. But if you, in lighting terms, if you have a lot of things to cover off and change, it's a very quick way of doing exporting a whole drawing and changing everything. As Tom mentioned very quickly, as he said earlier, main symbol. There's a main symbol with two separate lines, so we can give it a whatever the main do, 63 amp 3-phase, and then we can give it to rigging supply 2. And it's changed instantly, and that's all saved away. And then that'll appear on the plan. It tells the house electricians what that mains is and who it's for, and it can be easily marked up.
And then how does that update the data extraction then, or does that update it automatically in Excel?
No, it doesn't automatically update it. You'd have to just save the drawing and send it back out again. So
Gotcha.
you
So
have to be
you've
careful
got to
with your workflow.
redo that basically each time.
Yeah,
So if you were
it's not
if you were
automatic.
displaying that sort of that Excel information on a viewport somewhere or in paper space, um, you would have to actually just manually force it to send the data out and force it to bring the data back in again.
Absolutely, yeah. If you're editing the data, force it in, force it out. I think I can't remember if we spoke about it before. You can also do reporting within most of the CAD programs. You could actually do a report within
Yeah,
the program itself.
gotcha.
So maybe that's another week's lesson. But
Yeah,
equally,
cool.
talking about what information to put in, this could be an order number. This could be a plan just for the house electricians, and could be a 63 amp 3-phase,
Yeah,
and it's order number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
yeah,
and then they know straight away order number, references to their sheets, and
cool.
off we go.
Yeah, perfect.
And equally, if your supply's not working, you can ask for the right order number.
Yeah, perfect.
I know we're running over. I'll show two other things. Again, these are not my blocks; these are PRG blocks. This is a dynamic block, which means it does stuff. It does more than one thing. And this is a curtain, or it's the shape of one section of the curtain. If I click on the edge of the dynamic block, I can drag it out. And this is one of my greatest time savers for wrapping halls and curtains. Suddenly, you've got a curtain length, totally adjustable. So you just click it onto one end of the truss, drag it along, click it on the other end of the truss, done. And again, with mains, matting, these are all, and as Tom spoke about earlier, these are all things that take time normally. And the easier you can make a block to use, the more time you save and the quicker your drawing process is.
The other thing I do that with is truss as well, because I'm not usually trying to look at the detail of what
Yeah,
makes up the sections of truss. So it kind of works for me. I've just got sort of meter sections that I just drag for as long as I need, and then unfortunately someone else has to
So
work out
just
the
remind me what
detail.
that command was.
Oh no, so
this
that's a
one,
dynamic block that's been created, Dick.
dynamic block
So
Right.
I think dynamic blocks could probably be a whole topic of their own.
on that.
Yeah, it's
But
not
it's showing people the power of blocks. So
yeah,
if people wanted to learn about dynamic blocks, we could go on to
we
that.
do
But
another session on that.
a block is a very, very powerful thing within a drawing, and you can save yourself so much time. And not only in creation, but in editing, as Tom showed, you can go back into a block and change one instance. And if you had that block 1,000 more times of drawing, it would change the other 999 straight away. You wouldn't have to go back and do it. So spending time, as Dick's about to do, setting up your blocks correctly and saving them away is a wonderful thing to do, because it's so powerful. And once you've done it and then somebody sends you a drawing where they haven't been set up, you will mutter like the rest of
us. Brilliant. Dom, would you mind just unsharing your screen for now?
Of
and
course.
Then we just get you
Yeah,
guys
absolutely.
nice big pictures of you guys as opposed to so yeah, thank you very much for joining today. I hope that was a useful session again. Well, sorry for overrunning, and sorry we didn't get any time to go to any questions, but thank you to Dom, Dick and Tom. Much
Thank you.
appreciated.
Thank you
Thank
very
you very
much.
much.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye bye.